We've hit episode 11 here on Coastin with Piv and Finer, the big 1-1. Piv, we have Mike Ashmore coming on. He's covered the NHL. He's covered the NFL, mainly a New York City area guy. New Jersey is where he makes his home. He comes to us from the Trentonian, where he's covered baseball there for 19 seasons going on with the Somerset Patriots. And this was a fun episode, a different perspective, a FloHockey writer and contributor talking about why he's covering the ECHL this season for FloHockey.
And I think you hit the nail on the head. It's a different perspective. You know, we talk with players, coaches, all these sorts of people, but it's good to get a guy on the outside of the hockey world, but still inside of the hockey world, if that makes sense. A guy who gets to see a lot of hockey with his job and has seen a lot of hockey and also different sports as well, and has a different take on how things are going and how it's also good to get a little background on him too, because, you know, Mike Ashmore with working at Flow Sports and FloHockey, he's doing a great job and putting out some really quality content. So trying to put a little, face to the name as well. So we got to give a big shout out to him for hopping on episode 1 of Coastin.
And again, you can follow him, Mike Ashmore, on Twitter, mashmore98. He was great from, I think, a number of different perspectives. He mentioned that I think the most interesting part is that when he's at an ECHL game or has been covering the Trenton Titans, Trenton Devils, he's paying attention a lot more and needs to be in the moment a lot more than when he has access to a million different replays and pieces of information if he's covering the Rangers at Madison Square Garden. I thought that was really interesting. He talks about some old ECHL stories as well and how he sort of navigated the new world of journalism, which during a pandemic is not easy. So I think I think the people that are listening are going to get that sort of differing perspective also on that aspect of who Mike Ashmore is and why the heck he's joining us on this podcast.
Exactly. And that's such an interesting thing that he said too about, the paying attention level, because when you're covering games at the NHL scale or you're in a top tier league, there's so much information that is just at the ready for you. You can go back and watch a highlight right away. You can, do anything you kind of need to get whatever information. But, him covering the ECHL back then when Trenton was in the league, you don't have that information readily. And still, even now, a lot of teams in the ECHL really don't have that, those highlights ready to go right away. It might take till after the game to see, what happened on this play. But at that time, he's got to get his story in. He's got to has a deadline. So to see how, he talks about how the ECHL is just a different being than the NHL in terms of covering is really cool. It's a really cool discussion.
Well, we hope you stick around for this interview with Mike Ashmore, again, a writer for the Trentonian, covering the Somerset Patriots, used to cover the Trenton Devils, Trenton Titans, now a FloHockey contributor, and enjoy the interview. Piv and I have decided to go a little bit of a different route, one of our own in the FloHockey universe. Mike Ashmore, who's been a beat reporter for a number of teams in the New Jersey, New York, Philadelphia area for a handful of years, former Trenton ECHL writer and a writer for the Trentonian. Mike, it's wonderful to have you on. Longtime Twitter contact of both Evan and I, but we finally get a chance to meet in person. So welcome on the show, and we're really happy to meet in person. We're really happy to have you.
It's good to be virtually hanging out with you guys. I've been following you guys' work for a while now, so good to be chatting with you guys, and happy to talk about whatever y'all want. So let's jump in, man.
Yeah, first thing I have for you is, when I think of somebody that's covering the ECHL or broadcasting in the ECHL, you normally think of you go from the ECHL to the AHL to the NHL. Well, in your case, you're kind of hopping back into it here with FloHockey because you will cover the New Jersey Devils, the New York Rangers for the Trentonian, and cover the teams. But now you're covering the ECHL. So what has inspired you to jump down a couple levels here and write about the ECHL this year for FloHockey?
I guess a paycheck isn't a good answer, is it? No, I'm kidding.
Acceptable.
No, I've always had a really soft spot in my heart for the E. Like you said, I was the Trenton Devils and Trenton Titans beat writer from 2008-09 to 2012-13. Broke the news of my own unemployment when they folded. And I kind of always been looking for a way to kind of get back and stay involved. with the E, and this opportunity kind of came up. And the plan initially was that I'd be able to kind of come to some games locally, go to Reading and, go to Adirondack a little bit, go to Worcester, go to all these teams. And then obviously everything happened with your guys' division that kind of eliminated the possibility of that. So it's all been just virtual everything since the start, but it's been fun. Most teams have been pretty cooperative with this. You guys were both great to deal with back when it looked like y'all might still be playing, and it's been fun to get back in the E.
What are some of the things that you've kind of experienced now that, I mean, you've gone through a bunch of stuff in your career as a writer, beat writer, in fact, and now to kind of have this whole pandemic going on, and luckily we're, see the light at the end of the tunnel, but when it came March, right, when everything kind of ended abruptly, what was your thought process like? 'Cause I'm sure you had a lot of things to write about right when things were kind of closing down, teams doing their exits and all that stuff. But then there was a period of just unknown. What was going through your mind then?
A lot, and probably a lot of it, because it includes language I can't really use too much on here, but the bubble situation was kind of tough because I put in all the work, from the preseason in September to mid-March to be covering all this stuff. And obviously the expectation is I've covered the last 8 Stanley Cup finals prior to this past one, which I didn't get to do. So the expectation is, you get to do the full season, and no matter what, you get to go through the playoffs and, get to do the cup final, all that stuff. And then with the bubble coming up and the border restrictions with Canada, obviously didn't get to do that. So that was a big downer. And, at that time, I didn't really know, I didn't really know what to expect. Like maybe the first 2 or 3 weeks, I sat on my rear end at home. My wife would come home every night and be like, are you still depressed? I'm like, yeah. The answer doesn't change. Yeah. Every night. It feels like you kind of, and maybe you guys feel this way too, to some extent. It just feels like, everything you'd worked for kind of got taken away through no fault of your own. So I didn't know what my future, would entail in terms of working in sports. There was a long time where I thought I was done. I've done this my 19th year of doing this, but there was, a time during that whole stretch where I thought I was done and, wasn't going to get to do this anymore, and didn't really know what the covering things in person or covering things in general would look like. But things have obviously things are not great even right now, but things have kind of gradually gotten to a point where we can kind of get back to doing stuff, and, the E can get back to playing, and NHL is back to playing and all that stuff. So there's some semblance of normalcy that I've been able to maintain over these past few months. But when everything first started, it really sucked. It sucked for everybody. It's small potatoes compared to, what everybody's been going through as well with, the real effects of COVID and all that stuff. So I don't want to, make it seem like, trying to trivialize any of that. But if you're asking me personally, yeah, that stretch sucked for a long time.
Yeah. And I think you hit the nail on the head too when you said, you're put on your rear end for no fault of your own. And that's the kind of thing that's, in a way, kind of makes you feel a little bit better about the situation, but also makes you feel kind of crappy about it too, because you are, sitting on your butt without something to do. But again, it's not like, you did anything. You can't say, oh, well, I regret doing this, this, and this. It's just like this happened, and so many other people are in the same boat as well. So let's go back a little bit to you. You said you've been doing this for 19 years. What got you into, the journalistic side of things, the beat writing? What was your starting point?
I'll give you the short version of a long story. I was never really one to take school too seriously. I found out on the last day of high school that I was graduating. I would at least like to think I come off as somewhat intelligent. I just never took school too seriously. Was always pretty lazy with it. Ended up going to community college, Raritan Valley Community College, called Harvard on the Hill back here in Jersey. David, you might know about that. And went over there for a while, and I was in a journalism class. And I always kind of had an interest in it, but I never really knew how I could get into it. Writing was always something I felt like I was pretty good at. Was always interested in sports. Never really knew how to combine the two. I was in a journalism class, and I happened to be looking at photos I had taken of a Somerset Patriots game. And their beat writer at the time is a kid named Scott Stanchak. He is now an exec at the NBA. And he was in that class and happened to see me doing that and asked if maybe I'd be willing to help him out for the upcoming season. And that's literally how I got started, just kind of on a whim, just totally random like that. And I've been doing this for better or worse ever since.
With Somerset in particular, they have exciting news. We'll ask you about that at some point a little bit later, hopefully moving into the affiliated ranks of MILB from the independent league status. But, covering minor league baseball, independent baseball is over the course of a full season is very different than even covering a hockey team where it's a few games a week. I mean, you're there every day, and there's sort of a stereotype against the old grizzled beat reporter baseball writer. So what did you do and what have you done to try to avoid sort of fitting into that caricature of what a baseball guy or a baseball writer might be?
I mean, for the most part, I'm still an old grumpy prick, so I do kind of follow that stereotype to some point. But realistically, it's two entirely separate jobs. Like 6 months of the year, I'm on a beat, and it's you're around the guys every day, and I love that. And then there's 6 months out of the year I'm kind of on like that national level with the Trentonian and stuff, where I'm doing the Jet stuff, and I'm doing Rutgers football, and I'm bouncing around the NHL team and NHL team. At least in a normal scenario. This year, it's obviously been kind of localized to Devils and Rangers and a little bit of Islanders as well. But it's very, very different kind of bouncing between those two things. But I'm very appreciative and grateful to have those two opportunities. If I had to pick, I'm not sure which one I would do. But especially in Somerset, like I said, I've been there in the past 18 years now, and it's been a blast there. And I've gotten to, I think on a beat, obviously you get to know people a lot better. There's more of like that personal relationship there. And I think the majority of my friends in sports kind of come from that line, from being around those guys every day.
And I think especially too when you're on a team's beat and consistently following them and being through with them throughout the ups and downs. I mean, emotionally, you can't really cheer for the team, but it still makes for that better story when you're covering them day in and day out. The little nuances that are going to be going on, rather than as much as I'm sure you love to be on the national beat, doing what you're doing now with different teams, but now more localized, as you said. I mean, your heart's probably in it, but the emotional thing of being there every single day, going through everything with the players and the coaches, I'm sure is different as well.
Yeah, it's fun parachuting in on game days for Jets and for NHL stuff, but it's also very difficult too, because you're not on the day-to-day, kind of like you said, so you don't really necessarily know all the ebbs and flows and stuff. And actually this season, it's been a little bit easier for that with the virtual access. I'm able to jump in on these Zooms for morning skates and for practices and stuff that ordinarily I might not be able to do. So it's been a little bit easier with that this season, where I feel like I can kind of implement some more of that stuff into my, my game day writing for the Trentonian, for the NHL stuff. But it's definitely an interesting balance for sure.
18 years ago, when you started working for and covering Somerset, the landscape of journalism was quite different than it is now. How have you adjusted? What adjustments have you made as still a relatively young guy, even though you might try to dispute that? But what adjustments have you made over the course of your career and even recently to try to beef up the coverage and adjust to whatever the 21st century and 2020 to 2030 journalism might look like?
I feel like there was a time there where I was kind of ahead of the curve-ish with things. I was doing a lot of video. I covered the Trenton Thunder for a while, kind of bouncing between them and Somerset Patriots. And video for prospect stuff wasn't really a thing back then. And that was always I've always kind of felt like, for the most part, and maybe it's self-deprecating, but maybe there's some truth to it too, no one cares what I have to say about any of the actual stuff that's going on on the field, on the ice, and anything like that. I mean, that's obviously a very different role for you guys, where you're kind of painting a picture. For me, that's not really how I view it. I kind of feel like I'm kind of a way to bring, what the athletes have to say to people, and a way to maybe have access to kind of show like what they can do, and bring the video and stuff like that. So at that time, that wasn't really happening. So that was something I was really proud of back in the day, where I had a lot of prospect video, but then eventually that all kind of caught up, and then social media kind of all hit. I remember back when I started as a photographer, actually, like I said, for Scott. And I had this big bulky Sony camera that had a floppy disk inside as the memory. So things have certainly evolved from that time in that regard. But I think social media changed a lot of things for everybody. I've tried hard to really have a decent presence on Twitter. Somehow I weaseled my way into a blue check, and maybe the verified blue check. And some people might think that makes my opinion more relevant than others, when in reality, obviously it does not. So just trying to implement social media and trying to kind of see how people are getting their news and wanting to get their news. And obviously, as still somewhat of a print guy, it sucks to say, but print is slowly dying. It's been that way for years and years now. So putting more of an emphasis on the social media side of stuff, I think, has been really important for me over these past 7-8 years to gain somewhat of a following.
I mean, with the blue check mark, you do get an extra notifications little tab. It just says verified, so you can weed out the people who don't really, the peasants like us, Dave and myself, who don't have the blue check mark.
Oh, I equal opportunity replier. I try. That's one thing too. I guess is maybe to kind of answer that as well. As I really try to, I take the social part of social media seriously too. And I know, I have 3,200 or whatever it is followers. I genuinely don't know. But obviously, a lot of the bigger, more well-known beat folks, you can't get to everybody. But I do really try hard to answer everything and interact with everybody. And I hope that kind of comes across on the old Twitter machine too.
And the Twitter machine, as you said, is just a fascinating way. I hope when people, in 20, 30 years in the future, look to see where did news change online, it's going to be Twitter for sure, because the fact that, well, I'm sure, and you could probably test this too, just the fact that how quickly you need to get the news out. You have to be obviously the first one, and your news has to be correct too, which obviously it's been, a tough thing for people juggling that, because a lot of times we've seen, even recently, a lot of the big names on Twitter who have the blue check mark, they'll put something out, but they just want to be so first on it that they might get some things wrong, and they'll sacrifice that. But I mean, that's just the way the industry is now. And it was too when it was more newspaper, but everyone kind of had to get it at the same time, after the fact, but you had, 3 hours before deadline. Now it's like, get this tweet out in 5 seconds. Yeah,
there was kind of a gradual shift from just the internet itself to blogs. Blogs were a huge thing, kind of made that transition from just the internet and websites to blogs to Twitter. That's kind of where I got a lot of my following too, and covering the E and covering the Trenton Thunder, was I did these blogs where, you could kind of have that. It felt like it was instant. It felt like at the time, it felt like it was Twitter. And now obviously Twitter is just, especially if you have TweetDeck open or something like that, it's just bam, bam, bam. And it's right there. But like you said, it feels like even more now in the Twitter age, there's this god awful rush to be first rather than to be right. I know, I don't know how much you guys have followed the Rangers stuff with the Tony DeAngelo and some accusations that were made there that were ultimately debunked pretty quickly. It is what it is. I think everybody's just trying to make a name for themselves as well. And got to be careful with that. You can't just throw what at a wall and see what sticks. You got to make sure you're right before you're first.
And on a game night in particular, a beat reporter's role used to be show up, write the article, sort of thing, talk to the players, make sure you hit deadline. Now you're responsible for keeping the second screen community involved. What role do you feel that you need to play covering an NHL game? Devils, if you were covering the Devils and the Rangers tonight, what kind of a role would you say you need to play on social media throughout the game to make sure that people are invested?
I think it's different this season, especially because that no one you're talking to is actually at the game. We have monitors alongside of us to kind of paint what they're seeing. So I think a lot of it is trying to find stuff that maybe isn't being shown on the broadcast, maybe paint a little bit of a picture for what you can see, and maybe they can't. Something happens behind the play or whatever. I mean, obviously there's always that kind of balance too. There's people who like the live tweeting play-by-play element of it. There's people who don't. I always kind of lend myself towards doing more of the live tweeting aspect of it, just because, there's people. I always treat it like I'm talking to someone who's not watching the game. So that's kind of always my element of it. But especially this year, I try to focus a little bit more on stuff that I know they can't see as well. And there's always like that 15-second delay between live and TV that tends to annoy people if you spoil something. But that's part of the job as well, I guess.
Yeah, you're just showing that you better. You have the blue check mark. You're at the game. They're not, and you're just you're. So what if you have a little bit of delay? It's fine.
If you don't want spoilers, don't be on Twitter. I mean, it is what it is. So.
That's the thing. People will be like, I got into like an argument recently, a very light argument with one of my buddies, and I said like the ending of a movie that came out like 7 years ago, and he's like, "You don't spoil it for me." I was like, "There's a gap. There's
You've had 7 years to watch it."
Yeah, I would say like a year is like.
Yeah.
In terms, especially a movie. TV shows are a little different, but he's like, "You're spoiling it, man." I'm like, "You had 7 years to sit down and watch an hour and a half movie, and I told you what happened. So I'm sorry if I spoiled your experience. I forgot even what movie it was, but We had a little spat about that. Anyway, we're still good there. But I thought what you said was interesting how, in terms of everyone sitting at home right now and watching the games on TV and how you can't really, you have to find something else to kind of talk about. And I'm curious now, because I see a lot of guys on Twitter and, the beat writers who, are covering away games, which is interesting because they're not at the games. They're just watching on TV too. And I just got to figure out like how difficult that must be for those guys who are live tweeting, because it's like sitting on the couch with your buddy watching the game at that point. You don't want to be Captain Obvious, but at the same time, you want to, have something of value to bring to it. What have you seen in terms, I know you don't really do too much from on the couch, you're more in person, but in that situation, how do you kind of stand out?
I preface this with I have a lot of respect for anybody who's, on an NHL beat, whether it's kind of on the national, faux-ish national level like I am, or if you're kind of on the local, local beat writer. But I don't find any value in that whatsoever. I really don't. I can see exactly what you're seeing. And unless you can provide some sort of insight besides what I just saw myself on my TV, I don't really find a lot of value in essentially live tweeting something that we're basically watching together.
Yeah, for sure. And I watch the Islanders games all the time, and I'm on Twitter and I do that. And something happens in the game, especially if they're on the road this year. I see 5, 6, 7 tweets in a row, just the same thing, just worded a little bit differently.
Mm-hmm.
And they had the hashtag at the end. But again, at what point, is that too much? And I think it is too much at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's different now, and hopefully the landscape changes to where we're able to do a lot more on the road. I'm fortunate to where I have 2 or 3 teams I can kind of bounce around to. So where if you're following me for one team, maybe you are kind of viewing it as road coverage for your team or whatever. But I don't know. I think more you're kind of, if you're tweeting from home from road games, I think you're kind of looking more for context and things that, if you're on that day-to-day aspect of the beat, that you can kind of bring more than, holy crap, what a hit by Josh Bailey. Like, I mean, I saw it too, and I saw it at the same time you did. So, like, you're not bringing a whole lot to the table there.
Evan and I have talked a lot, specifically when I downloaded the DraftKings app, that everything is sort of moving towards – if you watch these broadcasts, I mean, the MSG broadcasts it's incredible compared to like maybe when Doc was the voice of the Devils, just how much it's changed towards, like, Steve Cangelosi will say, the live odds on the Devils to come back and win, right? Is this going towards the point where you might be somewhat involved in this kind of stuff, or is it only because FanDuel's a sponsor of the Devils, let's say, or is that the only reason why this is happening?
I'm probably not the world's greatest person to ask on it. I genuinely can't read a betting line, and maybe I'm somewhat proud of that. I see like
better off.
I'm like, I don't know what that means. What does that mean? I'd be kind of curious, maybe to kind of spin it on you guys, if you think maybe the minor league aspect of it will kind of go that route as well, because it feels like the AHL and the ECHL have kind of veered, away from that space a little bit, and kind of wondering maybe if the long-term sustainability of the league maybe goes more towards something in that way, where maybe even fans kind of bet on stuff in the arena. We've been kind of seeing some of that stuff in some of the the big 4 leagues, kind of wondering if it goes that way as well. But I guess there'll be a FloHockey story on that one day or the other. So.
I don't know. Evan might have better perspective than that 3-word answer, but I think about it from the perspective of, like, will people feel invested knowing, if you're a Royals fan, like, let's say back in the day they were playing Trenton and Yannick Tifu had goals in 3 straight games, and you could bet if Yannick Tifu, the former Reading Royals captain, was going to score that night on a Sunday afternoon, back end of a 3-3 in Trenton in front of 1,000 fans in the old barn. Yes. Yeah. But, like, will people feel the same connection towards that if they're doing it in the building then compared to, like, okay, Ovechkin could score tonight. Let's hammer Ovechkin to get a goal against the Penguins, just because the name recognition isn't the same. Will it generate the same type of revenue? Might be my only, obviously not the same type of revenue, but interest, which will lead to revenue for the teams. I don't know the answer to that. That's just me speaking out loud.
I guess for me, I look at it from the team standpoint, and especially now in the current landscape where you need to put rear ends in seats. Like, say spitballing, say there's a deal where it's like, hey, here's a ticket deal where we'll give you $5 in free credit towards, whatever wager you want to make, in arena. Like, I mean, it seems like that could be an interesting way to kind of get some more people in the stands, but that's, again, that's me spitballing there. We're probably getting rather sidetracked through my fault here. So.
No, through my fault of even bringing it up in the first place.
I think Sidetracked was our second choice of name for our show, so we're completely on brand here. I mean, if anyone who's seen one episode, like 5 minutes of our podcast, they know that it's like this much hockey talk and like anything else, which is like we love talking about hockey and all that stuff, and that's what FloHockey and we agreed on, and that's what we try to do. But a Sidetracked is a great point. But going back to the betting stuff, I mean, it's still illegal to gamble online in New York, which I think is going to change very soon, and I think a lot of states is going to change really soon because a lot of states are losing money and they know that it's an instant revenue booster, allowing sports gambling. But I mean, just in terms of what you said, give people a credit for a ticket and whatnot. And that's, the minor league landscape. You buy a ticket, you get something else too. That's how you get the butts in the seats. And I think it's also a great way of getting people to really pay attention more to the game. And one of the things I know, David, we've talked about a few times is branding players a little bit better. The ECHL especially is one of those leagues where guys come and go very quickly. And a lot of fans don't really take the time to really, get to know that certain player. That's what we try to do on social media and all of our videos. We try to get players, recognized by the fans and to try to have that connection with the player and the fan. So I think that's another way of kind of moving that in as well and trying to get the player, you put a guy who, is newer to the team, a guy maybe out of college, playing that weekend, if he gets a point, whatever the line would be on that, but in that sort of a thing, I think it'd be really cool.
The best promotion the Reading Royals did last year was New Year's Eve. It was a fan wins a car if a player gets a hat trick. And sure enough, Stephen Swavely, now retired, doing color commentary for the Lehigh Valley Phantoms, actually, which is awesome for him. He had 2 goals with 10 minutes left in the third. He scored his second goal, let's say. And the last 10 minutes of the third period, everyone knew where that fan was sitting. Again, it's New Year's Eve, so the crowd there are a bunch of diehard fans and some others that just wanted maybe a shot at the car because we did a pretty good job marketing it, I would say. And one person, that one lucky fan, the camera was on him, and that's there's no risk involved, but that is the element of maybe what you're trying to capture. And anyone that was at that game, I would say, would know which fan had the shot to win the car. And even though it's not quite the same thing we're talking about, it's pretty close. So maybe there is something there. And we'll end that Sidetracked with, we need to hear some old Trenton stories. I'm sure there's a lot of them. Because it was, the Royals missed Trenton the most of any team that has come and gone because it was
everybody misses. Well, let me put it this way: everybody misses Trenton on the ice.
Yes, for a handful of or lack of handful of points there. What are some of your memories covering Trenton at the old barn there? What was it like? You mentioned off the top that you kind of found out that you had lost your job as a beat writer through a press release. So give us a little bit here on the old Trenton Devils, Trenton Titans.
So I guess I'll go through that story first. It had become rather obvious. So all right, Trenton Devils, I did them for 3 years, and then they went away. And then pretty late in the game, they brought back the Trenton Titans, who had preceded the Devils and were largely beloved by that community. Attendance, as it goes for most ECHL teams, it kind of went a little bit down, but for the most part, it was way better than anything the Trenton Devils ever did. It became pretty obvious towards maybe the middle of that second season, which was 12-13, that sustainability was not really going to be a thing there long term. And you kept hearing rumblings, and I kept asking around. And then I was able to break this story. I beat the press release. I was able to break the story that they would be, I forget how they phrased it at the time. It was some nonsense that we'll be suspending our membership for the following year or something like that. Like, just say you're folding. It is what it is. So I did that. And I didn't really, I'd been covering a decent amount of NHL games actually for the ECHL back on their old website. I was doing alumni features for them. So I'd be going to morning skates and talking ECHL alums and kind of doing stories for Joe Babick, who is still with the league to this day. Great guy. Gave me a really good opportunity to kind of get my feet wet in the NHL. So that was one. Trenton stories I can actually tell you. The longest playoff overtime game at the time, it's since been beaten, was my first year on the beat. It was also the only year they made the playoffs. That was a fun year. That was 08-09. It went 4 overtimes versus Elmira, and of course, in classic Trenton fashion, they lost that and lost in Game 7. That was the first Game 7 I actually got to work in person. I've since done a bunch in the NHL, but as miserable as Trenton largely was for the most part, I am very, very, very well aware that my hockey resume would be absolutely nothing without my time there. And I always try, and even, I made the paycheck joke early on, but even without that, I always try to find time to do things in the E when I can. I actually went back to Adirondack a couple years ago and did the All-Star game that was there. I try hard to give my time to the E whenever I can. I'm extremely fortunate to have gone on to things I do since covering Trenton. And I really wouldn't be anywhere hockey-wise without it. I do not forget that.
What are some of the differences covering an ECHL game versus you walk into Prudential Center or Madison Square Garden and you got a big 7 p.m. tilt in an NHL building?
For the most part, it's I can't phrase it that way. I was going to say my level of give-a-you-know-what. My level of pay attention is a lot higher when I'm doing stuff in the E. I can be on my computer and doing stuff, and I can look up and I can see a replay what I missed. And Trenton, the Jumbotron, the video board, I don't know if you guys were ever, quote unquote, fortunate enough to get to go there. Awful. Couldn't see a damn thing. And if the visiting team scored, they wouldn't show it. And if you covered Trenton for 5 years, you saw the visiting team score a lot. So you always had to be paying attention. And I always kind of had to be really locked in, which I guess I'm kind of grateful for now, because I feel like I'm more locked into the NHL stuff than I ordinarily might be if maybe I got my start there. But yeah, just making sure you pay attention. You can't miss anything there. If you miss it, you missed it. There was no way back then. There weren't streaming. FloHockey wasn't a thing back then. We weren't streaming games back then. If you miss it, you missed it. So it was pretty much my goal at that time to not miss it. I had my camera out back then in the day. If you go to hockeyfights.com, you'll see a lot of the older clips are still mine from the scraps back in those days. Miles Stays and Thomas Harris and all the Trenton tough guys from back in the day. A lot of Reading fights of mine are up there as well. So, just making sure you didn't miss anything, I think, was my main goal back then, and my level of give-a-you-know-what.
And you mentioned Joe Babick a little while ago, and you got to give a shout-out to him. He might be a weekly viewer of the Coastin podcast. I know he's always chiming in on Twitter and making fun of whatever we do, whether it be my lights in the background.
All those nice things about him without even knowing that.
No, he's great. We love Joe. He does so much for the league and helps us out tremendously when we are playing. So as we continue on here, Mike, I got to ask you the question because I see you got the winter hat on, as do I. Hair's a little bit longer.
Yeah,
that's just mine. When was the last time the barber was seen? Was it pre-pandemic, or did you let it grow for a bit? What was the
Well, primarily the hat is on to cover up this 5 head. It's not. I think the hair looks better with the hat on, but it's just to cover up this thing because I felt like the reflection might kind of cause some issues with the video element of the podcast. I didn't want to do that. So I lived in an apartment. I guess from middle of 2016 to last May. That was on top of a barber shop. And I would get my haircuts there. I gave the guy $13.50 a month for a free haircut, but still I was getting a free haircut. And ever since I moved out of there, I have not been able to justify getting a haircut. So it's part pandemic and it's part just being a cheap bastard. So for the past year, I've let this god-awful flow go, and here we are. Usually I do like the weird old guy, like comb forward thing, so you see less of the 5 head, but it's pretty much it's like FloHockey should put like a tattoo here so they get free advertising. There's plenty of room. So
a little what is it, like the stickers that kind of melt away after a few days that you see the kids have. If you're still taking mass transit to like go places to go in. So this is a hair question. So you'll probably, like, if you think someone might sit next to you, like or I hope no one's sitting next to you right now, but like, would you ever kind of, if you feel like there's something sketch about to happen on the train going into the city, like, would you kind of like pull it down and try to like scare them away if need be, if that was a necessary thing?
Who want to sit next to this?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I can probably pull it off too a little bit, cover this up a little bit, but I haven't thought of that. But David, you've probably taken NJ Transit enough to where I probably should do that. Because there's plenty of sketch on NJ Transit on a regular basis, especially these days too. Penn Station is, and it's not even to make light of it, but just with what a lot of people are going through these days. Penn Station is not a fun place to be at night. So there's a lot of interesting interactions that you will have on any given evening on NJ Transit, to put it kindly. But yeah, I guess I can. I'll work on pulling the flow. My wife keeps telling me to get a man bun, which I don't really want to do. I think that's pretty much a recipe to get my tail kicked.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't really want to do that, but you never know. We'll see. Maybe I'll get this thing long enough to where I can effectively pull that off. Not that anybody really should.
So speaking of Penn Station, I know you guys are the New Jersey Transit side of things. I'm the Long Island Railroad side of things.
My wife is from Islandia, so I've done that plenty. Yes.
Did you guys see that Rose Pizza closed?
Yes.
At Penn Station?
Yes, that was. I would go there many times after a game to kill time before a train, because trains are usually every hour late at night.
Yeah.
So I would go there often. I've killed many a time, and many. I guess we'll call it a post-game soda there. So yeah, it's that's sad to see. But there's a lot of Penn Station looks probably vastly different from the last time you guys were there. They've done a ton to renovate that.
Yeah, I know. I used to go to Rose Pizza when I worked in the city through the summers, and it's so funny because like at like 5 or 6 p.m., like on the platforms, there's like beer vendors. There's just and there's lines of people and like soda vendors. we talk about beer probably every episode, so we could say the B word here.
Okay.
But in terms of it's just. I remember like that would be my first summer when I worked in the city. I was like, these people like just drinking on a Tuesday at like 6
I like the people on the train who have the very not subtle brown paper bag. It's like,
half of it sticking out.
Are you having an Arizona out of there? What's going on? I'm very confused. Yeah, of course you're pounding a tall boy. I see it. Yeah.
Yeah. The Long Island Railroad, Penn Station. What a tremendous place. Again, I heard they made all these renovations. I haven't been there in a while.
You'll know what I'm talking about when I say it. The smell is still the same.
That's beautiful.
A little musty, a little combo.
Yeah, we'll go with musty. Musty.
Yeah.
That's a nice way to describe it. Pip, go ahead.
Yep. So we've discussed this before on the podcast. We talk about with coaches cliches, and I'm sure that you've heard every single one under the sun. If you had to make a Mike Ashmore Mount Rushmore of your maybe most hated cliches or your biggest eye roll cliches, what would it be?
Vince Williams and I didn't always get along back in Trenton, but now we are pretty good friends. He is a scout for the Vegas Golden Knights now. I see him in Newark all the time. Really good dude. Every game, because they felt like they lost every game. Every game I would hear him say, we were working hard, but we weren't working smart. And like, I get it. I get what he's saying, but it's a cliche. And I heard it all the time. And there's obviously other ones too. Give 110%. And all the ones you hear all the time. But that's the first one that came to mind when you asked that, is we're working hard, but we're not working smart. God, I can hear that's like drilled into my head. I'm saying that.
Football might even be – there's a lot of cliches in hockey. Football coaches, I think, are the worst in press conferences with it. Well, Adam Gase didn't say much. Evan and I, proud New York Jet fans here, unfortunately. But football coaches are, it's all about that inch and all this just nonsense stuff. Football worse, maybe, or would you be able to power rank them? Baseball might be the best. I think baseball coaches are and managers are the most open. But I'll let you come to your conclusion on that.
I don't know. Like the two coaches I've covered so far with the Jets were Todd Bowles and Adam Gase, and they really didn't have a lot to say either way. So you really didn't hear a lot cliche-wise because you really didn't hear a lot, period. Baseball, I guess I've been fortunate too. Like the two managers I've covered for the most part in Somerset were Sparky Lyle and Brett Jody, and they really Sparky, if you had him on this podcast for 2 seconds, you'd probably have to bleep out a bunch of things. He's one of the nicest, kindest people on the planet. Same with Brett and Tony Franklin and Trenton as well. But maybe I'm just fortunate to have avoided most of that, or naive to just maybe just erase it whenever I hear it and just ignore it. But for the most part, I think I've been, around, at least from a managerial coach standpoint, guys who have at least attempted to avoid those for the most part.
Evan and I have asked a ton of bad questions on this podcast, but you have to hear journalists that might be sometimes younger than even Evan or I, which is hard to believe. I don't want to use the word worse, but there's a lot of very terrible questions that are asked in press conferences. And I kind of like when the coaches maybe give it back to them, or the players if it's a bad question. What are some – you will hear a question being asked and you just know – it's going to be bad. What's going through your mind as you hear that now over Zoom?
I guess it's maybe a bit of a twofold answer. For years, I'm sure you might even be expecting this answer. Talk about. Can you talk about? Talk about. That's not a question. It technically is a question. Can you talk about it? Yes.
Yes, you
That
can.
would be the answer. Yes. Not go off into your answer. If you really want to answer that question, the answer to that question is yes. Yes, I can. Now ask me an actual question. It drives me nuts. I hate that. Every now and then I have to fall into that when I'm like rambling through a question. I'm like, damn it, I do not know what to ask. Can you just talk about that? Can you elaborate on that? And like, the cringe that goes through my body when that comes out of my mouth. Like I've done this 19 years, set an example, like be better than that. And I guess the other one is, I guess I should go into it, but you hear a lot of, not a lot of, but anytime you hear like kind of like trying to think of a better way. A fanboy kiss ass. I'm trying to think of a better way to phrase it, but I really don't have one. A fanboy kiss ass question after a loss, where you're trying to sugarcoat a loss, and it's someone who obviously is pretty invested in the success of the team, and maybe treats it more as a fan thing more than like actually being on a beat or a reporter or a covering thing. And it's, well, you guys lost 5-0, but this guy looked pretty good. Maybe you can just talk. I'll combine both. Maybe you can just talk about him for a little bit and how he looked. No, ask tough questions after losses. Like stop puffing up what it is. It's a bad loss. It's okay to maybe that's part of the answer too. Is it's okay to ask tough questions too. It's always or how big was it to get this? And the answer is always, oh, it's huge. Like, just try to ask questions that get different answers other than that. That's probably a great freaking hockey cliche too. I'm sure you've been in tons of press conferences, both of you guys, where maybe even ask those questions. I do it myself a ton too, where it's, well, how big was it when Yannick Tifu scored that goal to make it 3-2? Oh, it was huge. And then elaborate. But it's always, you're always trying to frame it in a certain way. And I guess you kind of always get locked into certain ways of asking questions, and I'm as guilty of it as anybody else is, but maybe there's only so many ways to ask something. I don't know.
So when you're at press conferences, I know a lot of people have different ways of doing things. Are you a handwritten note guy? Are you a record and then go back to it, or tape recorder? There you go.
Yeah, I've never, when I first started, when I was 20, which was a really damn long time ago, I tried the notepad route. And I couldn't, I don't know, I didn't trust myself with it. Like I would never want to be in a situation where I misquoted someone or misrepresented someone because I didn't have it fully accurate on that notepad. And with the way people speak, you're never going to be able to get anything. Like you pretty much be writing in shorthand, and my handwriting sucks anyway. So I'm not going to be able to read most of what I'm writing down anyway. So with this thing, it's always been pretty foolproof. And if someone says, I didn't say that, which has happened in my career, where someone's like, oh, you misquoted me. I didn't say that. That's not, that's out of context. I can just be like, hey, want to listen to it? I got it right here. So it's mostly you're covering yourself and you're covering them at the same time.
Wanted to wrap up with some FloHockey chat, which is the reason why we asked you to come on.
Assuming I haven't been fired after this podcast, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, if we're safe, you're safe. I hope we're safe after.
As long as that's my freelancing motto is as long as the paycheck clears.
You've worked on stories from teams that you may have never even watched one of their games in person live. So how have you navigated that? How have you relied on guys around the league to figure out what you're writing about?
Yeah, that's been tough. Like I have they've been fortunate, or they've been kind enough to set me up with a membership to where I can, watch the games on demand when I want, or watch them live when I want. And I've done that a little bit, but it's really just kind of combing over box scores and following on Twitter. Twitter's been a big thing as well, kind of seeing, who's standing out, what I should write about. I've had guys, team PR and radio guys pitch me stories. That's great. Jesse Liebman with Orlando actually did that today. That led to a story that I did today. So I love that. It saves me some work, and it kind of, maybe it helps them. It gets the story out that they want out. So I'm happy to kind of reciprocate that as well. For me, it fills content. For them, it gets a story out that they want done. I'm fine with that. That's a two-way street. That's great. But a lot of it is just looking at stats and seeing either names I recognize, or seeing guys who are playing well that maybe I feel deserve some ink or deserve a story or something like that. But yeah, I mean, I'm open to, and for anybody team-wise watching this player, I'm open to anything. I don't care if you've got a fourth line guy who's got -8 and 30 penalty minutes. If you got a great off-ice story on him, awesome. I'm open to tell any story as well as I can on anybody in this league, whether it's on ice, off ice, whatever. It's a company line, but whatever supplements the streaming deal in a way to where people can read stuff and have a better idea and have a better understanding maybe of the people that they're actually watching out there, then I'm doing my job.
You can follow Mike Ashmore98 on Twitter, his work in the Trentonian, which is at Sports Trenton on Twitter as well. But Mike, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for hopping on with us, and we hopefully will have you on maybe at some point a little bit later in the year to talk about some more specifics of what you're working on. If something really interesting comes down the line and you'd like to share it, happy to have you on. So thank you so much.
Of course, it was great chatting with you guys. Hope to work with you guys when things get a little bit more back to normal down the road with your teams. And to anybody watching this who I blinded with this thing, I greatly apologize.
Absolutely not. Thanks again, Mike, and be well, okay?
You too.